Be me, just another guy trying to get traction. Wrapped up college with an unremarkable degree, but good enough to land a corporate internship. Ended up in the marketing wing of a mid-tier tech firm, trendy interior, brick aesthetics, recreational furniture that's more decorative than functional. The plan was straightforward: stay low profile, deliver solid work, absorb everything I could, and convert the temp badge into a permanent one. I'm not there for networking theatrics or bonding over burnt office coffee. The department was compact, predominantly women, sharp and clearly experienced. There was Hannah, a senior specialist who'd been there for years, quiet, efficient, knew her stuff inside and out. The kind of person who just wants to get the work done and go home. Then there was Capri, younger, super ambitious, always laughing a little too loudly at the boss's jokes. You know the type. For the first month or so, things were normal, standard office life. I was given small tasks, I completed them well, got a few good job nods. I was learning a lot, especially from Hannah, who would occasionally show me shortcuts in the analytics software without making a big deal out of it. It was fine. A bit boring, but it was a step on the ladder. Then, our old manager left for a better paying job, and the company hired his replacement. Her name was Helen. Helen arrived like a weather system. On her first day, she called a team meeting, not to get to know us, but to present her manifesto for a new marketing paradigm. She used a PowerPoint deck filled with abstract shapes and corporate buzzwords: synergy, ideation, leveraging assets, disrupting the space, all the classics. But there was a new flavor added to the mix. She talked about dismantling the historically patriarchal structures of corporate communication. She spoke of creating a truly safe space, free from the inherent biases of traditional workplace hierarchies. I'm just sitting there, the only guy in the room, trying to look attentive while my brain is slowly turning to static. Capri was eating it up, nodding furiously at every slide, occasionally chipping in with an "exactly" or "so true." Hannah had this perfectly neutral expression, but I could see her subtly zoning out, probably thinking about her grocery list. Helen finally finished her presentation and asked if there were any questions. Silence. She smiled, a tight professional smile. Wonderful. I can see we're all on the same wavelength. My door is always open for collaborative and empathetic dialogue. The tone was set. The first few weeks under Helen were an adjustment. Meetings became longer and less productive. We'd spend the first 20 minutes doing an emotional check-in. Helen would insist that projects were failing, not because of bad strategy, but because the team's emotional energy wasn't aligned. My role as the lone male intern quickly became a talking point. If I presented data, Helen would listen, nod, and then say something like, "Thank you, Alvin. That's a very analytical perspective. Now, can one of the ladies offer a more intuitive read on the situation?" One time, I flagged a potential issue with an ad campaign's targeting. I had the numbers to back it up, showing we were wasting money on the wrong demographic. Helen listened patiently. "I hear your concern, Alvin. I really do. But I feel like you're focusing too much on the cold, hard data, and not the human story we're trying to tell. Capri, what's your heart telling you about this campaign?" Capri's heart apparently told her the campaign was a beautiful expression of the brand's soul. The campaign, of course, underperformed. When the numbers came in, Helen declared it a spiritual success because it sparked a conversation, even if it didn't spark any sales. It became a pattern. My contributions were either ignored or framed as examples of rigid masculine thinking. I once spent a weekend building a detailed reporting dashboard to automate a tedious weekly task. I thought I'd get a pat on the back. I showed it to Helen on Monday morning. She looked at it, clicked around for a moment, and said, "This is very efficient. But I worry that automating these tasks robs us of the opportunity to connect with the data on a personal level. We need to feel the numbers, not just see them." She then tasked Capri with creating a vision board for the weekly report. So instead of my automated dashboard, we had a cork board with magazine cutouts and inspirational quotes. The weekly task now took twice as long. I stopped offering ideas. I just did exactly what I was told, did it perfectly, and sent it in. I became a ghost, a quiet, efficient male ghost who fixed spreadsheets and fetched coffee. Hannah noticed. A couple of times, she'd quietly message me on the company chat. "That was a good idea you had in the meeting. Too bad it got shot down." It was the only validation I got. The main event, the thing that made me write all this down, centered around the company's biggest client. Let's call them Titan Corp. We managed a massive multi-channel marketing campaign for them. It was the department's bread and butter. The campaign had been running for over a year and was starting to show its age. Performance was dipping across the board. Engagement was down, conversions were falling, and the client was getting nervous. The director of our entire division, a no-nonsense older guy who only cared about results, made it clear that turning the Titan Corp account around was our #1 priority. He said if we didn't show significant improvement by the end of the quarter, there would be structural changes. Everyone knew what that meant. Helen saw this crisis as her ultimate opportunity, a chance to prove that her empathy-first approach could succeed where the old, aggressive, data-driven ways had failed. She called an emergency, all-hands-on-deck meeting. The mood in the room was tense. Everyone's job was on the line. Helen stood at the front of the room, radiating a kind of calm that was more unnerving than reassuring. She started by talking about the pressure we were all under. She acknowledged the stress, then she dropped the bomb. The traditional approach to a problem like this is flawed, she announced. It's adversarial. It's rooted in masculine panic. We need a different way. We need a space where creativity can flow, unburdened by judgment or the pressure to perform in a certain way. She paused for dramatic effect, her eyes sweeping across the room of worried faces. That is why, to solve the Titan Corp crisis, I am going to hold an intensive off-site brainstorming session. A few people nodded, seemed reasonable. This will be a safe space, she continued, her voice lowering slightly. A space for open, vulnerable, and powerful ideas to emerge. A space free from the typical dynamics of a mixed-gender workplace. I could feel my stomach clench. I knew what was coming next. To ensure we have a truly uninhibited flow of creativity, the brainstorming session will be for the women of this team only. The silence in the room was so thick you could have cut it with a knife. Everyone was looking at me. I was just staring at the grain of the conference table, trying to keep my face completely blank. It wasn't just that I was excluded. It was the way she did it. It was a performance. She was making a grand statement. Capri had a smug, triumphant look on her face, like she'd just won a major victory for womankind. Hannah was studying the ceiling with intense interest. The other women just looked deeply uncomfortable. Helen turned her gaze to me. Her expression was one of pity, as if she was doing me a favor. "Alvin," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "I know this might be hard to understand, but sometimes, to let female brilliance truly shine, you have to remove the male element from the room. It's not personal." It felt incredibly personal. "While the ladies and I are busy ideating, I have a very important task for you." I waited. "Our supply closet is an absolute disaster. It's a chaotic mess. It's emblematic of the old, disorganized energy we're trying to move past. I need you to go in there and get it organized. I want everything cataloged, labeled, and sorted. It's a vital task for our operational efficiency." So there it was. The brilliant female minds would go off-site to save the company's biggest account. And I, the intern with the toxic male energy, would be left behind to sort paper clips and count sticky notes. It was a public, deliberate, and perfectly executed humiliation. I didn't say a word. I just nodded slowly. "Okay," I said. My voice was flat. I stood up, pushed my chair in, and walked out of the conference room without looking at anyone. I could feel every eye in that room on my back as I walked down the hall toward the supply closet. I opened the door, flicked on the single flickering fluorescent light, and was met with the sight of teetering stacks of printer paper and overflowing boxes of dried-up pens. This was my battlefield. I spent the first hour in a sort of numb haze. I just started moving boxes, clearing shelves. My mind was blessedly empty. It was mindless, physical work, and in a way it was a relief. But as I worked, I started to think. They thought this was a punishment, a way to put me in my place. But they had made a mistake. They left me alone in the office. They left me with a computer. And they had forgotten to revoke my access to the company's analytics server. I was the intern. I had access to all the raw data, all the historical campaign performance, all the back-end metrics for the Titan Corp account. I probably had a clearer view of the ground truth than Helen did. So after I finished organizing the A to L section of the hanging file folders, I sat down at an empty desk. I wasn't invited to their brainstorm, so I decided to have my own. A brainstorm with one participant, me, and one guiding principle: the data doesn't lie. I pulled up everything I could find on the Titan Corp campaign, years of it, click-through rates, cost per acquisition, user journey analytics, demographic breakdowns, heat maps, A/B test results. It was a mountain of information. I wasn't looking for a feeling or an intuitive read. I was looking for a pattern, a break in the pattern, an anomaly. I spent hours digging, cross-referencing spreadsheets, building custom reports. The rest of the office was a ghost town. The only sound was the hum of the servers and the clicking of my mouse. And then I saw it. It was small, almost insignificant at first glance. A tiny deviation in the user conversion funnel that started about 6 months ago. The drop-off rate between add to cart and final purchase had increased by a fraction of a percent. Most people would have written it off as statistical noise, but it had been consistent. A slow, steady bleed. Why? What changed 6 months ago? I dug through the project archives, the change logs, the developer notes, and I found it. 6 months prior, the Titan Corp website had a minor back-end update. A new payment processing API was integrated to offer more payment options. A quality of life improvement. On the surface, it worked fine. But I decided to test the user path myself, step by step, in a sandboxed environment. I went through the process, found a product, added it to the cart, went to checkout. Everything seemed fine. I entered my details. Then I got to the final payment screen, and there it was. The new API had a slight latency issue. It would hang for about 3 to 5 seconds before confirming the transaction. But more importantly, it had a conflict with a specific browser extension, a very popular ad blocker. If you had that extension running, the final confirm purchase button would occasionally just not work. It wouldn't click. There was no error message, nothing. It just became a dead button. Customers weren't abandoning their carts because they changed their minds. They were abandoning them because the website was literally broken for a significant chunk of them, and it wasn't telling them why. It was a simple, stupid technical glitch, a problem that had nothing to do with brand soul or emotional energy. It was a bug, and I knew exactly how to fix it. I didn't just find the problem, I outlined the solution. It was a two-pronged approach, short-term. A simple script could be implemented immediately to detect the conflicting extension and display a message asking the user to disable it to complete the purchase. A band-aid, but an effective one. Long-term. Roll back the API to the previous stable version until the developers could properly patch the new one. I wrote it all up. I didn't use a single buzzword, no talk of synergy or empathy, just 3 slides. Slide 1, here is the problem. I included a graph showing the exact point the conversion rate started to drop, correlated with the date of the API update. Slide 2, here is why it's happening. I put in a screen recording of the bug in action. Undeniable proof. Slide 3, here is how we fix it. 2 bullet points outlining the short-term and long-term solutions, with estimated impact on the conversion rate. It was clean, it was simple. It was undeniable. I saved the file to my desktop. Titan_corp_solution.pptx. I looked at the clock. It was late afternoon. The women-only brainstorm was probably wrapping up. They'd be coming back soon, filled with vulnerable and powerful ideas written on sticky notes. I stood up, walked back to the supply closet, and finished labeling the box of whiteboard markers. I had my solution. Now, I just had to wait for the right moment to use it, the calmest I had felt in weeks. They had excluded me, and in doing so, they had given me the one thing I needed to actually solve the problem: focus. No emotional check-ins, no vision boards, just me, the data, and a broken button. I went home that evening knowing I had the answer. The question was, how was I going to get anyone to listen? The next day, the atmosphere in the office was strange. The brainstorming team returned not with a bang, but with a weird self-congratulatory whisper. Helen called a debriefing meeting, which I was graciously allowed to attend. They had covered an entire wall of the off-site conference room with multicolored sticky notes and yarn, creating what Helen called an idea constellation. Capri presented their findings with the gravity of someone who had just cracked the human genome. Their grand solution was not a strategy, it was a feeling. They had decided the Titan Corp brand was suffering from a crisis of authentic connection. The proposed solution was a new campaign initiative called Project Embrace. There were no metrics, no budget projections, no technical specifications. Instead, they had a mood board filled with pictures of people hugging trees and laughing while eating salads. They had a list of emotional keywords they wanted the brand to embody, like nurture, flow, and radiance. The centerpiece of their proposal was to replace our current ad copy with brand poetry. Capri read an example she had written. It was about a river finding its way to the ocean, which was meant to be a metaphor for the customer journey. I sat there, stone-faced, thinking about the broken checkout button. Hannah asked a simple question. So, how will this increase conversions? Helen fielded the question with a serene smile. She explained that Hannah was still thinking in an old paradigm of direct response marketing. Project Embrace wasn't about conversions. It was about cultivating a long-term, holistic relationship with the consumer. She said that when customers feel truly seen, the conversions would naturally manifest. The director of the division had scheduled a check-in meeting for that afternoon. Helen was practically vibrating with excitement, convinced she was about to blow his mind with her revolutionary, feminine-centric approach. I kept my presentation saved on my desktop. I knew what would happen if I showed it to her. She'd either dismiss it as uninspired, or, worse, she'd absorb it into her own presentation and take all the credit. My moment hadn't arrived yet. The meeting with the director was a masterclass in corporate doublespeak. Helen and Capri walked him through their idea constellation. The director, let's call him Mr. Henderson, was a man in his late 50s. He'd been with the company for decades. He was a numbers guy. He lived and died by spreadsheets and P&L statements. He sat at the head of the conference table, steepled his fingers, and listened without a single change in his expression as Helen talked about brand poetry and holistic consumer wellness. When she finished, there was a long, painful silence. Mr. Henderson finally spoke. His voice was dangerously calm. He said he appreciated the team's creative energy. Then he asked, "What is the projected Q4 impact of Project Embrace on our primary KPI, the cart-to-purchase conversion rate?" Helen blinked. "Well, as I said, this is more of a long-term brand-building initiative. The impact isn't something you can just measure on a spreadsheet." Mr. Henderson leaned forward slightly. "Try." "Projection!" Capri jumped in, trying to projection. Capri jumped in, trying to save her. She started talking about the immeasurable value of brand loyalty and the unquantifiable ROI of authentic engagement. Mr. Henderson cut her off, not rudely, but with the finality of a closing steel door. "I don't deal in the unquantifiable," he said. "I deal in profit and loss. What I am hearing is that you have spent 2 days on an off-site and have produced 0 actionable, measurable solutions to our single biggest problem." Helen's confident facade finally cracked. She started to stammer about needing more time to flesh out the tactical execution. He stood up. "You don't have more time. The client is expecting a concrete plan by tomorrow morning, a plan with numbers that will reverse the decline, not a mood board." He looked around the room, his eyes lingering on each person. 9 a.m. tomorrow, this conference room, a viable plan. If you don't have one, I will find a team that can provide one. He walked out, leaving a crater of panic in his wake. The mood in the department turned from smug self-satisfaction to sheer terror. Helen was freaking out. Her entire new paradigm had just been shot down in flames. She started snapping at people, her empathy-first persona evaporating completely. She pulled her women-only team back into the conference room for a frantic, panicked attempt to turn their idea constellation into something that looked like a business strategy. The door was slammed shut. I was, once again, left out, alone at my desk in the now empty office. This was it. This was the moment. My hands were actually shaking a little as I opened my email. I could just keep my head down. I was only an intern. The department's failure wasn't my responsibility. I could ride it out, finish my term, and get a recommendation for not causing trouble. Or I could do something. I thought about the condescending smile Helen gave me when she sent me to the supply closet. I thought about her talking down to me in meetings, framing my competence as a masculine flaw. I thought about the sheer arrogant incompetence of Project Embrace. This wasn't just about saving my own skin. It was about the principle of the thing. Good work should matter more than good-sounding words. I took a deep breath. I attached the titan_corp_solution.pptx file to a new email. The recipient was Mr. Henderson. The subject line was simple: potential solution for Titan Corp account. The body of the email was just 2 sentences. Mr. Henderson, my name is Alvin, the marketing intern. I was not part of the brainstorming session, but I took the liberty of analyzing the campaign's raw data and believe I have identified the core technical issue and a viable solution. Please see the attached. I stared at the send button for a full minute. This was a career-defining or career-ending click. Going over my manager's head was a cardinal sin in the corporate world. I clicked it. The email disappeared from my outbox. The die was cast. I packed up my things, went home, and spent the night barely sleeping, wondering if I'd have a desk to go to in the morning. I got to the office at 8:30 a.m. the next day. The tension was so thick you could taste it. Helen and her team had clearly been there all night. There were empty coffee cups everywhere, and they all looked exhausted and defeated. At 8:55, Helen sent a company-wide calendar invite for the 9 a.m. meeting. She had included me on the invite list this time, an afterthought. We all filed into the conference room. It felt like walking into a courtroom. Helen stood at the front, looking pale. She had a new presentation loaded up, but it looked rushed and flimsy. At exactly 9 a.m., Mr. Henderson walked in. He wasn't carrying a coffee or a laptop. He was carrying 3 pieces of paper. They were printouts of my 3 slides. He didn't sit down. He walked to the head of the table and placed the papers face down. He looked at Helen. "Go ahead," he said. Helen launched into a panicked, rambling presentation. It was a mess. She was trying to retrofit her Project Embrace idea with fake metrics and vague promises of data-driven poetry. It was painful to watch. After about 5 minutes, Mr. Henderson held up a hand. "Stop," he said. "Just stop." Helen froze, her mouth half open. Mr. Henderson picked up the 3 pieces of paper from the table. "At 7:14 p.m. last night," he said, his voice cold and precise, "I received an email. It contained a 3-slide presentation. In those 3 slides was a clear, concise, and data-backed explanation of our problem, along with an immediate, actionable solution." He flipped the first page over. It was my graph. "This single graph explains more about our revenue decline than your entire idea constellation," he said, not even looking at her, but at the paper. Helen was white as a sheet. I don't know what that is," she stammered. "Our team worked on a collaborative—" "This was not a collaborative effort," Mr. Henderson interrupted. "This came from one person, someone who apparently wasn't needed for your exclusive brainstorming session." He looked up from the papers, and his eyes scanned the room until they landed on me. The entire room turned to look at me. It felt like a spotlight had just been switched on. "Alvin," Mr. Henderson said. His voice wasn't angry anymore. It was just factual. "Is this your work?" I could barely find my voice. I just nodded. "Yes, sir." "Could you please walk us through it?" "The short version." I stood up. My legs felt like jelly. I walked to the front of the room. I took a breath and just explained what I had found. I talked about the API update, the latency, the browser extension conflict, the broken button. I explained the short-term script fix and the long-term API rollback. I didn't use any fancy words. I just stated the facts. The whole thing took maybe 90 seconds. When I was done, the room was utterly silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Hannah was looking at me with a small, impressed smile. Capri looked like she had just swallowed a bug. Helen was staring at me with a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. If looks could kill, I would have been a pile of ash on the conference room carpet. Mr. Henderson let the silence hang in the air for a moment longer. Then he turned his full attention back to Helen. "So, let me see if I have this straight," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Our biggest account is on fire. You are the manager in charge. You hold a special exclusive brainstorming session to find the solution. And in the end, The only viable solution comes from the one person you deliberately excluded and assigned to organize office supplies. He paused. Is that an accurate summary of the situation? Helen opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She just stood there, completely and utterly defeated. She knew. Everyone in that room knew. It was over. The fallout was swift and surgical. Mr. Henderson ended the meeting by telling the IT department to implement my proposed short-term fix immediately. He put Hannah in charge of overseeing it. He then asked me to stay behind. As everyone else filed out, Helen shot me one last venomous glare before practically fleeing the room. Capri scurried out after her, not making eye contact with anyone. Once the room was empty, Mr. Henderson sat down. "That was good work, Alvin," he said simply. "You ignored the noise and you solved the problem. That's all that matters in this business." He told me the internship was, for all intents and purposes, over. My heart sank. I thought for a second I was being fired for insubordination. Then he slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a formal job offer. Position, marketing data, analyst. The salary was significantly more than I had expected. "Your new desk will be ready on Monday," he said. "Welcome to the company." The changes didn't stop there. Within a week, my fix was fully implemented. The conversion rate on the Titan Corp website didn't just stabilize. It shot up by 15%. The client was thrilled. The crisis was over. Helen wasn't fired. That would have been too clean. Instead, she was reassigned. They created a new position for her. Manager of Internal Brand Synergy. It was a completely meaningless title. She had no team, no budget, and no real responsibilities. Her new office was a single cubicle right next to the noisy copy machine, a corporate Siberia. I saw her a few times, just staring blankly at her monitor. The vibrant revolutionary leader was gone, replaced by a ghost in a pantsuit. Capri's career trajectory took a nosedive. Without Helen to champion her, she was just another mediocre employee. People stopped taking her seriously. She tried to make small talk with me by the coffee machine once, telling me she always knew I had great ideas. I just gave her a polite blank stare, filled my mug, and walked away without saying a word. The best moment came a few weeks later. Hannah, who was now the acting team lead, stopped by my new desk. She put a coffee on the corner. "Just wanted to say, I saw your solution get implemented. It was elegant. You earned this?" It was a simple statement. No drama, no grandstanding. Just quiet, professional respect. From someone whose opinion actually mattered. That felt better than the job offer. The final image I have from that whole affair is from a few months later. I was walking back from lunch and saw Helen carrying a small cardboard box with her personal effects out to her car. Her reassignment had finally ended with a quiet resignation. Nobody from the office was there to see her off. I just kept walking. I learned a lot during that internship. I learned about analytics, about marketing, about corporate politics. But the main thing I learned is that, in the end, reality has a way of cutting through the noise. You can build a whole world out of buzzwords and ideology, but a broken button is still a broken button. And the person who can fix it will always be more valuable than the person who just wants to write poetry about it.